how to implement ISO 27001 Annex A 5.12 Classification of Information. Okay, I'm going to talk you through this one. There's quite a lot to go at here, right? But we're going to start off simple and then we'll do a bit of a deeper dive and a bit of a dig into it. In basic terms, what we're looking at here is we're looking at classifying our information within our organization. And we're classifying it for information security purposes. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is information within our organization has a value to us. And the value that it has an associated level of protection that we want to put against it. If we don't classify our information, we're not giving anybody any rules or guidance on what it is that we expect them to do. And if we classify everything at the same level with the limited resources that we've got in terms of time and money and people, we're setting a very high bar for ourselves potentially in terms of how we protect everything, right? So let's think about some basic pieces of information here. You're going to have marketing information. Does marketing information need the same level of protection as HR data, payroll data, employee benefits data? And I'm hopeful that the answer to you is no, right? They are clearly two separate levels, two classifications of data. We don't really care who accesses our marketing information, but we care a lot about who accesses our payroll information. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in an information classification scheme. And as part of that classification, we're going to provide guidance and rules about what it is that we expect to happen when it comes to each of those levels of classification. By doing that, we can guide our employees and people that work with us and explain to them what it is that we expect them to do with the data that they are being given custody of, right? Whether that's to process their day-to-day operations or whether it's for them to manage or whatever that may be. Now, for me, I have always worked on a very simple classification scheme, right? Classification schemes can be as complicated as you want to make them. Your starting point is going to be looking at laws and regulations that relate to you, looking at customers that relate to you that may dictate to you the classification scheme that you're going to implement, right? Things like the government have their own classification scheme. It's quite detailed. It has 5 levels within it, and it's quite complicated in what it wants to do. If you have the benefit of defining your own classification scheme, then 3 levels of information classification for smaller organizations I have found works very, very well. Those 3 levels of classification are public, internal, and confidential. So what we're saying here is, yes, we have documentation that we don't really need to protect, and we classify that as public. So things like our marketing, our website, things that are external that we're not overly concerned about people gaining access to. And in fact, in most cases, we want them to gain access to it. Then we have documentation that's specific to the organization, right? It could cause some minor embarrassment. It could cause us some minor problems, but it's internal. We classify it as internal documentation. These are going to be things like our processes, how we go about operating things. They could be things like a certain level of management reports that are in place. The third level of classification that I like to go with is confidential. Now, this is the highest level of classification. A confidential classification is things that would be allocated to things like, yes, payroll, yes, employee benefits, yes, information about individuals. Here we're taking a crossover with the GDPR, right? I would classify the majority of the data subject data information as being confidential. Anything that relates to an individual, I would classify as confidential. Anything that could identify an individual's special category information, I would classify as confidential. Think of it this way. This is something that could either break the law if it was disclosed publicly without any control around it, or it could cause you significant embarrassment or financial loss, reputation loss. It could hurt you, right? So confidential information is the highest level of classification that I would implement in an organization. That is the level of classification that you are going to throw the majority of your resources at. This is the one where you're going to be putting in place all of those technical controls, all those process controls, restricting access to it, making sure that it has the highest level of availability and all the good stuff that goes along with that. So that has worked well for me for many, many years. When it comes to the end of the standard itself, the standard comes with its own guidance and examples on what it thinks information classification should be, right? So ISO 27001 sets out 4 levels of classification. Do you need all 4? Not necessarily. I'm very happy with the 3. My audits that I've had for clients are happy with the 3, but I'm giving you the knowledge and giving you the information. So they are provided as an example. Note the word here, example. They're not saying as a checklist that you must implement them. They're just trying to give you, as I am, some guidance on how you can classify information. But what they have here is disclosure causes no harm. Disclosure causes minor reputational damage or minor operational impact. Disclosure has a significant short-term impact on operations or business objectives. Disclosure has a serious impact on long-term business objectives or puts the survival of the organization at risk. Okay, sensible, right? I mean, I've got no particular issue with them. It's not a bad example. It does give an extra level of complexity, and then you're going to start to have to answer the question by what do you mean by short-term? What do you mean by minor? What do you mean by major? What do you mean by long-term? So you start to add in a little bit of additional complexity. But between either the basic one that I have, so public, internal, confidential, or the 4 levels that the standard gives you, you understand the principle that you have to apply the classification of information into your organization. So your starting point is document what your classification levels are, agree with the business what those examples are. Let's get those down and let's get those signed off. So, what are the things that we're going to do when we're implementing this? What is my advice to you from an implementation point of view? You're going to have an information and classification handling policy. Clearly, I have an information classification and handling policy template that you can download that's fully populated, or you can look at the video about how you create it and you can create one yourself, but you want that policy. So that policy is an absolute lifesaver when it comes to this particular clause. It sets out what your levels of classification are. It sets out all of the considerations around data protection and how that fits in with your classification. It lays out and sets out all of the expected controls that you have, and it's probably going to, well, it is going to cover the information lifecycle as well. So what you do at various elements within that lifecycle. So you're going to have your policy, you're going to have your classification scheme. We've touched on that and we've gone through that. We're going to base it on business need. So the needs of the business are paramount, right? As an information security professional, it is not your job to introduce a 20-layer information classification that even NASA would wince at, right? You know, this isn't an academic exercise. You're working with the business to understand the needs of the business, operationalize the business, and help the business move forward. So whatever level you go with, whether you go with my 3, whether you go with the example 4, whether you take an industry classification standard that's provided by the government, you need to base it on the needs of the business as your foundation. Then what you're going to do is you're going to consider the legal requirements. Are there any legal requirements on you that could influence your classification? So we're going to be looking at our legal register, our information security legal register, our legal and regulatory requirements register. We're going to be looking at, as part of that legal and regulatory requirements register, our customer requirements. Are there any specific customer requirements that we've got when it comes to classification? So all of those are going to feed into that scheme when it comes to writing and developing in that. At the end of the day, information owners, when it comes to the application of classification, information owners decide the classification of their information. Now, the information security manager can help them and can guide them, and clearly there are some significant pointers, right? I mean, certain data of certain types just is what it is. But we're working on the principle that information owners decide the classification. They own it. They're the owners, they're the custodians of it. What we're going to do is we're going to review and update information classification over time, right? So we're going to look at this at least annually or as a basis of significant change, and we're going to make sure that our classification is still working for us. If we are applying the highest level of classification to data that doesn't need it and it's consuming resources and cost and time and money and people, then we can reassess that. If the classification scheme that we've got is too simple or too complex, again, we can assess that. We're remembering here that ISO 27001 is a standard based on continual improvement. You don't necessarily have to get it right day one, but as long as you are continually improving, then you are going to be absolutely golden. What you're going to do is you're going to align topic-specific policies that you have, other policies, other controls, with your information classification. So here we're looking at things like access control. All those technical controls that we have, again, are going to be based on the level of classification that you've got. So understand that this has a wider impact and it has a knock-on impact when you go through your implementation, and you're going to have to tie that in and make sure all the other areas are aligned to and are following it. So as a result of that, you're going to be consistent across the organization, right? One of the challenges, the bigger you get, the more complex you get, is consistency across the organization about how you apply information classification. So just be wary of that. Everyone has a common understanding of what the protection requirements are. Everyone should have an understanding of what the classification scheme is. It should be communicated on a reasonably regular basis. It should form part of your training and your onboarding. People should understand that. What we also have to do, and what the standard brought in 2022, is consistency across organizations. So our ability to map, where relevant, applicable, to map our information classification scheme to that of other organizations. Now that could be the information classification scheme of our suppliers. We want to make sure that our suppliers are aligned with us. So we may have to do a mapping between our classification and what our suppliers have. Equally, our customers are going to have their own information classification and their requirements around that, and their understanding of what the words mean to them and what they're expecting the controls to be based on those words may not be aligned with what it is that you're doing. So you are going to have some work to do about making sure that you have aligned your classification scheme with other entities to get consistency, again, about how you are managing and protecting the information that you have. What other things that can we do here? Well, we could put in place an information classification process that describes exactly what you do through the information security management lifecycle. You could keep a data asset register up to date that shows who is allocated what assets and what level of classification of data there is. You can follow best practice and your information classification policy for marking data with its classification. So this can be visually, putting classification within the document, or you might want to start looking at things like metadata. Although when we get to that particular control, that's one that I advise most of my clients to outscope. You're going to put in place controls appropriate to the level of the information classification and based on the risk of the business. So this isn't a standalone document, as we've referenced. It does inform other things. And you're going to communicate your information classification approach to your employees. Having an information classification summary document, again, a template that I provide, is a great way of doing that, right? It's just a crib sheet. It's a go-to sheet where you can see, what are examples of information that fit within each classification? What are the examples of controls? How do I destroy that data in general terms, right? Just distilling down that information classification and handling policy into a one-pager and a crib sheet that people can use as a go-to. It comes as no surprise, as I keep saying it, I have a number of templates. I've got an information classification and handling policy, information classification summary, data asset register, all of the templates in the ISO 27001 templates that you need. I'll not go through it. They're on the high table ISO 27001 store. Please go and have a look at those. So what's an auditor going to check? When the auditor comes to check you, what is it that they're going to be looking for? They're looking for information classification, and has it been defined? Is it documented? Has it been implemented? Has it been approved? Has it been signed off? Is there physical evidence of information classification? They're going to be looking at a data asset register. They want to see a data asset register, and they want to see how that data is classified within that data asset register. They are going to check that. Again, it's about documentation. And they're going to be looking to make sure that you've considered data protection. Is data protection, if GDPR is applicable to you or similar regulation and laws, has it been considered and is it referenced within your information classification? So there's a lot that they're going to go at there, all around documentary evidence, all around making sure that you've implemented it and that you have that in place. When it comes to common mistakes that people make, what are the common mistakes that people make? Information assets are not marked with classification. This is an easy one, right? You've seen all the documents that I create that have classification on them, and it's a label and you can see it, and it's a visual representation of what the classification is. Many people create documents, PowerPoint documents, video documents are the worst offenders for this, and they just don't put classification on it, right? They just don't mark it up with classification. So whatever the document is that you're creating that forms part of your management system, or an auditor is going to look at, make sure it has classification on it in line with your policy. The second mistake that we see is making classification too complicated. The more complicated, the harder to manage, the more resources it's going to require, the less likely is people are going to follow it. So just pay heed and attention to that. Don't overcomplicate this, but do it appropriate to your business need and your legal and regulatory needs. So why is it important? The reasons being, we stated really at the beginning, is you have limited resources. You can't protect everything, right? If you have a marketing presentation that requires biometric data, fingerprint, iris scan, for somebody to read some marketing information, it doesn't make sense, right? You're not going to apply that level of control to that. So we need to understand the documentation we've got, the protections that are required for it, and then be proportionate and appropriate to that. But we also need to remove from that personal judgment, right? We want to get consistency across our organization. We want to make sure that we're doing it in the right way and that we're maintaining information security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. So it's a very important one to have. It does form one of the foundation blocks of what it is that you're going to do when you build your information security management system. So please do spend a little bit of time getting this right and making it appropriate to you. So that was ISO 27001 Annex A 5.12 information classification. There is a blog that goes along with this. Every single video that I do has a detailed blog within that. More information, more detail on the levels of classification. So be sure to go and check that out. But yeah, for today, we're done, right? You're going to be golden. Stick with me, and I will see you on the next tutorial video.